Welcome back, viewers, readers, to our continuing conversation with Miss Nanjala Nyabola. And Nanjala, I wanted to time goes so quickly when we're chatting. So, and we're talking about, it's not about how 40 million Kenyans are using Twitter, but it's how the million who are using it creatively to create agency. And yes, we've seen cases where people have been able to use Twitter to get a reaction from the authorities that perhaps would not have been possible to get that quickly in using ordinary ways. But let me take a bit of a leap here, and because you just launched a new book day before yesterday, Thursday, and it's called Traveling While Black. Do you have a copy? Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Traveling While Black, congratulations. Number 2,
Thank
2
you.
down.
Yeah, 2 down.
Okay, Traveling While Black. Traveling While Black. Tell us about it. I mean,
yeah. So the book has the word traveling in the title.
Yes.
And because it has the word traveling in the title, a lot of people think that it's a travel memoir because I do travel a lot.
Yes.
But the first sentence in the book is actually, this is not a travel memoir.
Okay.
The title is taken from one of the essays. It's the title of one of the essays, and one of the essays is really about race, and the whole book is about race and human mobility in different forms.
Yes.
So there's a bit about migration, there's a little bit about my own travels, there's a little bit about how other societies sort of handle the character of the traveler, the character of the person who's moving.
Yes.
And the reason why I wrote it in this form was that's what I actually studied, like to graduate school level, is I studied human mobility, refugees, displaced people,
yes,
displaced communities. And I worked in the field for a long time. And I was always struck by how race was such an implicit part of the practice and of the field, but you could never name it.
Okay.
So you could be in an organization and the white foreign staff are making 10 times what the most senior Black staff member is making, even though the Black staff member is the one who has to absorb all of the risk, is the person who is, if there's a crisis, you're the person who is first to show up, you know. And then even on a practical level, the crisis in the Mediterranean Sea has just really, it stung, me personally, because a lot of these people are around my age. And it, for me, it is both a failure on the part of African governments to provide space and to make life possible for young people to stay on the continent, to have purpose. But it's also a failure of the West, and it's also a failure of foreign governments who show up these authoritarian regimes, who make this oppression possible, who and then decide that it's okay to let people die in order to protect this illusion of a pure European identity. And so the book kind of is I'm trying to use my experiences as a lens through which to start to think about these bigger issues. Because people in Europe will say things like, why don't they just come through the airport? Why don't they just come like normal people? And I say, well, this is what going through the airport looks like. If you are, you have 4 university degrees and you are a highly paid professional. This is what it feels like, that an ambassador, a visa consul can shout at you. Because I have an essay in there about this horrible experience that I had with an embassy here in Nairobi. He called and he canceled every single visa application because one of the applicants that morning had yelled at one of his staff members. So even though the rest of us had nothing to do with it, he was literally just going down the list. No visa for you, no visa for you, no visa for you. And we were like, what did I do? All I did. So I want people to understand that there are human beings on the other side of all of these conversations. but also that there are different ways of thinking about this stuff. I talk a lot about traveling in Africa because I think there are a lot of African societies that have a long tradition of welcoming travelers, of opening up their doors to foreigners.
Yes.
And instead of learning from that, we're shutting them down.
Yeah.
That's what's happening in the Sahel.
Yes.
So what they're calling these human trafficking routes,
yes.
and the French government, the European governments have spent a great amount of money trying to shut down these routes and whatever, and then they don't provide alternative employment for the people who have been running these caravans.
Yeah.
The trans-Saharan trade has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years. And a lot of these people, look, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that they're all good.
Yes.
I'm not saying there's no risk. I'm not saying that there's no danger. But I'm saying that criminalizing practices that have been integral to the survival of communities in these really tough parts of the world,
yes.
in order to serve European migration imperatives,
yes.
is not only disruptive to those communities, it's
yes.
disruptive to the entire continent.
Yes.
And so it moves through personal narrative, it moves through analysis, it moves around the world. I spend a little time in Nairobi because the city is such a big part of my political and my intellectual formation. And I think I always say to people, for me, it's always been more important to be writing from Nairobi than to be a Kenyan.
Yeah.
Meaning that I wanted to use this book also to make a claim, to amplify some of the intellectual work that's happening in this country that can sometimes get lost, I think, because in this migration conversation especially, you don't hear African voices, even though they're talking.
Yes.
The people here who are doing work.
Yes.
So that's the broad strokes of the book. But as usual, my audience is not the academy. My audience is ordinary people. So it's written in a very conversational style.
Yes.
I hope that it's inviting people into the conversation. I hope that it makes ordinary people feel empowered to have better formed opinions about the whole global mobility migration debate, because I think we've abandoned this conversation for so long to technocrats whose intentions are often clouded by poor, thinly veiled, racist, exclusionary rhetoric. Like, it's so thinly veiled. But because Europe is having this crisis, it's sort of poisoning, and North America, you look at what's happening in the Mexican border, the border with Mexico, you look at Asia, you look at Bangladesh with the Rohingya, Australia with the offshoring. We have to stop that discourse in its tracks.
Yeah.
Human mobility is normal, it's natural, it's historical. How do we let's reclaim that narrative from whatever this is happening that's been happening in the last 30 years.
Okay. Yeah, it's always struck me, a key element of the Kenyan culture and what has made us strong as a country is the fact that historically Kenya has been a very open society. Mm-hmm. So our streets have Ethiopians, Eritreans, Burundians, Rwandans, Ugandans, Somalis.
Second generation, third generation.
Yeah. And many came here as refugees. They work here, they live here. So we're fairly laissez-faire about that. And I think that's very African. That's just, okay.
Yeah, but it's changing. And I think that's what really prompted me to write this book.
Yeah.
Was that I had grown up in a context where my classmates were, third generation Ethiopian, people from Rwanda. I had a lot of Rwandan refugee classmates. I had people from all over the region. And for me, even in Nairobi, there was just always this sense of, like, people were coming from all over the world, coming and going. Yeah. And then I entered this professional environment whereby the assumption was of homogenous, static communities.
Okay.
So people don't say it, but they you come, the foreign policy analysts will come to a place in Nairobi and assume that there's something pathological that's happening here. That this is the weird thing, not the static, monolith community. That's normal. This is bad.
Yes.
And so I write about my experience in Burkina Faso. I went to this really northern town in Burkina Faso called Gorom Gorom. Gorom Gorom is the last town in the desert in Burkina Faso before you enter the Sahara Desert. And I'm sitting in this market, and people have come from Tunisia, have come from Morocco, have come from Mauritania, have come on their camels. So every Thursday they're on their camels, they come in and they have this market and they sell stuff, and then they go back. And they get there, and the people in the village start putting out water for the camels and for the goats, and I'm talking about thousands of camels and goats, not unprompted. There's no expectation. I didn't see any expectation of payment. It was just like, and when I was in Gorom Gorom, I showed up and the hotels were full.
Okay.
The hotels.
Yeah.
There was four beds.
Yeah.
The 4 beds were full.
Yes.
And I knocked on the church door, and I said, I came all this way and I thought there was going to be space. There's no space. And they were like, yeah, of course you can stay here. There's an extra room in the back. Yeah. Never asked for a single dollar.
Yeah.
This paradigm of welcome is so embedded in communities who have so little, because they appreciate how much people will suffer without it. If you go through Sudan is in the desert, all of these Sahel communities, and even I saw it even in Malawi, you see people would have this pot of water outside their houses and with a cup, so that people who are walking, it's too hot, you can have drinking water.
Yeah.
There's an ideology of welcome that is embedded in communities that have little, because everybody knows that I might be on the other side of this one day.
Yes.
I think European societies would be served to learn from that.
Yes.
I think North American societies would be served to learn from that. Yes. Criminalizing human mobility, letting people die.
Yes.
Allowing children to be separated permanently from their parents.
Yes.
As a projection of power.
Yes.
Is a level of moral, what's the word? Rot.
Yeah.
That will ultimately lead to more suffering.
Yeah.
And we've done this before. You look at European political history, you look at what led up to the Second World War, what led up to the Holocaust, what leads up to all of these mass exterminations of people, starts with these small moral rots where we normalize immense suffering of people that we think are quote unquote other. So that's the context of the book. I knew that I had to make a decision about how personal I wanted to make it.
Yes.
And I chose to make it more personal than just about anything else I've ever done, because I think that we who have a measure of privilege have to be willing to put it on the line in service of other people.
Yeah.
And I remember there's an essay in there about when I went to Palermo in Sicily, and I watched one of these boats arrive. And John, I can't even tell you. That was the huge cargo container ship filled with people who you can just see the suffering.
Yes.
Because they've survived slave camps in Libya. There were guys who had come from Bangladesh. Can you imagine getting from Bangladesh to Palermo through the Sahara Desert? Like, that's, and there are people who, the Egyptian roots, there's Sudanese people who have get stuck with organ smuggling, and it's a level of vulnerability and suffering that I think a lot of people are rarely confronted with. We just see the numbers. And so that's why I felt like I had to make it a little bit personal, because I think that I had to invite people into the conversation so that they could feel, oh, Nanjala, oh, I know Nanjala, sit down. Let me sit with Nanjala for a while. Oh, okay, this is what has happened. So, long story short, short story long.
Good on you. I haven't gotten my coffee, so I'm looking forward to obtaining it. Presumably, it's available at all the usual bookstores like Bookstop and Prestige and the others.
Yeah, this time around, I didn't have to go and ask.
Okay, good. Well, it'll get better and better. Just to close off, Nanjala, we're in the middle here in Kenya, and I think also in other parts of East Africa, and also, of course, in the West. They have we're in the middle of the so-called second wave of COVID, and I wanted to ask clearly the changes that are being wrought by this pandemic, as is the case with all previous pandemics. Some of the changes are permanent. It's changing the way we interact, the way we organize. There are many people who will never really use an office in the same way that they used it before, etc., etc., etc. And I wanted to ask, there's a saying: never let a good crisis, never let a bad crisis go to waste. And I just wanted to get your reflections, because you've been thinking about studying and putting a lot of intellectual energy into this social networking and its impact on our societies. And you talked of it as an intensifier, accelerator. Now we have COVID. How is it changing us? How has it changed the environment, for good and for bad?
For good and for bad. I feel like COVID has been a test for social institutions, for political institutions, the state, and its function.
Yeah.
And I think the neoliberal state has failed us.
Okay.
I think we have mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of evidence, just looking at the global situation.
Yes.
That communitarianism.
Yes.
And I say communitarianism because I don't believe in the false binary between communism and capitalism.
Yeah.
I think that they are. I just refuse to believe that in a world of more than 7 billion people, we have exhausted every single political ideology that's possible. Yeah. So communitarianism, i.e. starting from solidarity, has outperformed individualism by leaps and bounds. The societies that said we are going to take care of everybody, starting with the most vulnerable. New Zealand provided money to foreign travelers who were stuck in the country during the lockdown. So the people who were stuck in the lockdown didn't need to go outside. Spain and Portugal made it possible for anybody who needed medical treatment, regardless of their nationality, to see a doctor when they needed it. South Korea did the same. Every society that said we will start with protecting the weakest amongst us, and make sure that institutions are performing for all of us, has outperformed societies that have been saying for a long time that public health is an unnecessary expenditure, that we need to make our public health systems leaner. The UK is having to, after showing the world the way with the National Health Service, put in place this conservative government that was privatize. And now they're having to rebuild hospitals that they had shut down. Less than 2 years ago, because they don't have the capacity. And so that's the first thing that I think has happened, is that we have been reminded political science 101, Locke, Hobbes, the function of a state is we give them some of the power in exchange for a measure of protection. And if they don't do that, we have to interrogate the state. What's the point? What's the point of living in if giving up your freedom of movement? You know, because we do that.
Yes, we do.
You give up your freedom of association, you give up your freedom of whatever, because you say it makes more sense for me to be part of a society than to be on my own.
Yes.
If that society doesn't come through for you, then what's the point?
Yes.
So that's the first thing that I think has happened. The second thing that I think has been challenged is the idea of the normative superiority of the Western state.
Yeah.
And I say that to mean the two things that have struck me. One is you have these Western pharmaceutical companies that are working on vaccines.
Yes.
And they announce 95% effective.
Yes.
And immediately stocks go through the roof. People start to buy shares, people start to sell shares, and then immediately you see news that all of these companies have hoarded up the stock of these vaccines.
Yes.
So what's going to happen, likely, what it looks like what's going to happen is what happened with HIV/AIDS. And this is, someone pointed this out the other day, and I think it's worth remembering what happened with HIV/AIDS.
Yes.
That ARVs, for a long time, were so prohibitively expensive.
That is true.
Private companies had literally decided, let people die so we can make money. And when India started to produce generic drugs and Brazil started to produce generic drugs, they were sued. There had to be litigation. There had to be advocacy and activism to allow them to produce the generic drugs.
Yes.
This is the situation that we're seeing, that the rabid individualism, inward lookingness of this, Westphalian sort of state model that we're seeing in the West is inherently selfish.
Yes.
And it leaves most of the world's population vulnerable. So there's going to be a need for pressure and for solidarity, because I think, and this is my third point, what has happened in Africa is instead of having the fast outbreak, we're having the slow outbreak.
Yes.
It's what we did with the really harsh lockdowns, and they were really harsh and unnecessarily criminalized.
Yes.
Was that we put a bump in the spread, we didn't stop it. Then we took the bump out, and now we're seeing this, exponential spread.
Yes.
And so 100% there's going to be another lockdown. There has to be.
Yes.
There is going to be, instead of doing things properly, we did things badly, and now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yes.
And the hope is that they will figure out the vaccine, a generic vaccine that can be spread, a treatment protocol that can be spread throughout the world at an affordable rate, and that our governments will get their act together and be able to demand this.
Yeah.
Because one small net positive that happened very early on in the pandemic was, I think it reminded African elites that you still have to be here. You still have to live here.
Yes.
You still, we're still here. And hope that the outgrowth of that will be pressure to make these treatment protocols, to make these vaccines available here before this slow outbreak starts to outpace our systems. Because like in Kenya, we've lost 31 doctors so far.
Yes.
We have 7,333 doctors.
Yes.
You lose, one doctor for every 6,000 people.
Yes.
So you lose 31 doctors, that means you've lost, that almost I don't do math, but it's almost 56,000 people have lost,
That's to
a doctor.
Professional doctor, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the contradictions of the nation state have been laid bare.
Yeah.
I think what you pointed out about how pandemics lead to social reset, and it's not always good, because remember what happened with HIV/AIDS. The social reset is that it gave Western governments especially tremendous power over African governments because they pay the bills.
Yes.
Gavi, PEPFAR,
Yes.
All of these things are the things that are keeping public health systems in countries like Kenya alive.
Yes.
And that dependency has not been good for accountability.
Yeah.
That the fact that the Ministry of Health can lose all of this Gavi funding and can lose all of these global, what's called the Global Health Fund funding, and still there's no public outcry. So there's a tension there that has emerged. And what you really hope for is that people are learning.
Yes.
That the wise societies, the societies that are being led by wise people, are learning and are not just sitting back, on the Titanic, on the hero of the movie, and you're standing on the bow of the Titanic and you see the iceberg coming and you're just gafla bingu, you're just staring at the iceberg when you should be moving.
Yeah.
I think that's what that's where we're at. We're like, don't be the person who's just staring at the iceberg.
Yes.
Be the person who's moving and who's learning and who's doing something. Yeah.
I mean, you and I have, we've been having these conversations now via using Zoom. I did not know Zoom existed before COVID. Yeah, I discovered things, and there's Skype, Zoom. Now there's a multiplicity of increasing sophistication and etc. Of all these platforms that allow us to communicate under these circumstances. You've articulated extremely well how this has sort of challenged the very nature of the state. Just like to get a bit of your reflections and perspectives on how it has affected us. We had talked about how it sort of atomizes us into, this pushes us into little ecosystems and bubbles. But just thinking going forward in terms of your reflections on how this will affect the nature of work. I serve on a number of boards of different organizations, and we've been holding our board meetings via Zoom and other software, and of course you can present, but people are beginning to feel this is not it. This is not it. This is not it. And therefore, perhaps we need to put a bit of thinking into what are the implications of this in terms of human interactions, in terms of the general mental condition of humanity. Let me ask Nanjala. She thinks about these kinds of things at that macro scale.
At that macro scale. It honestly, it was one of the first things that I started thinking about.
Yes.
Because there actually is significant amount of research on this, that there is something called touch starvation. Touch starvation. That actually human beings are like these things like handshakes and hugs and things like that actually have an evolutionary function, that we are supposed to have the pheromones and have that contact, that it builds a sense of being part of the society, being part of your community. So it was one of the first things I thought about. And because for me personally, I remember when I first moved to the UK many years ago, here we are very tactile people here in Kenya.
Yes.
You're gota bro. You're like, you're handshaking, you're doing all of that stuff. And you notice something about British people is they don't really touch. And so like, French people will do the air kiss, and Americans will hug, and British people don't really touch, especially people they don't know. And so it was one of the first things I noticed when I moved to the UK. I was like, it's been 3 months and I haven't touched another human being. So I had been thinking about it for a long time. When this thing happened, that was the first place that I went back to. I was like, because I ended up doing that experience, doing a lot of reading about this stuff, and I that's when I discovered this idea, or I stumbled upon this idea of touch starvation. Human beings are supposed to touch, and so I think what we're feeling right now is a grind. Like it wasn't supposed to be 9 months. It was supposed to be 3 months, maybe 6. And here we are 9 months down the line, and we're being told, you can't see your family. It's even worse than it was in March.
Yes.
It's even worse than it was in June.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing fatigue. I think people are tired. I think one of the mistakes that has happened is that people have not been generous with themselves and with the people they work with. We've tried to keep the momentum that was there before. And I think one of the most profound things I've seen said is, you're not working from home, you're working at home during a pandemic.
Yes.
And there is a psychological weight that comes from it.
Yes.
And we have to learn how to be kind to ourselves because of that. There was a time at the beginning of the pandemic where everybody just kind of had their physical events all went virtual. Yes. So, I mean, I've had at least 2 Zoom meetings that were 8 hours long.
Ooh.
And by hour 4, nobody's paying attention. Nobody. People are cooking. People have gone. You hear them when they switch on the nini out. By the way, I'm driving. I had to do this because how can you sit in front of your computer for 8 hours nonstop? And I think what we're seeing now is fatigue, and people are feeling the grind, and people are feeling the touch starvation, and people are feeling, and that's why people are starting to break the rules, and people are trying to sneak around. And it's a really vulnerable, this is what happened in the States, it's what happened in Western Europe. It's a really vulnerable time because even though people know the risk, their risk calculation is compromised by this frustration and this tired. And they're like, it's actually worth the risk. And it's not. Because you see people going to the club, it's just one time. Going to a political rally, it's just one time, and then they get sick. And so I think I empathize with the fatigue. I feel it. I'm also human. And what we really need to be, the public messaging, I think, needs to be, Jacinda Ardern did so well on this, and even Nicola Sturgeon has done so well on this in Scotland with the messaging to tell people, I know you're tired. I know this is difficult, but we have to work together to get through this. As opposed to ours, who we are being told, we will send the police, we will send tear gas, we will send No, that's bad public health. People need to be counseled. Go into the community radio stations, go into the whatever, and tell people, I understand that this is a slog. I understand that you're tired, but the emergency is still with us. And we need as many of us as possible to get through this. So that's where I'm at. I hope I don't know. I hate handshake slander, not our handshake, real handshakes. You're getting it. But like real handshakes. I hope handshakes come back. I think touch, human contact, is an important part of building human societies and building communities. And we human beings, again, this is not my original quote, this is something someone else said. Human beings are essentially plants with complicated emotions. The basic things that we need: sunshine, water, affection, attention. And so you look at how other animals, they have their grooming practices, and they breeding ticks, and we're animals. We're animals. It's part of our defenses. So I hope that people can just really endure this fog, and that our public health systems shift from punitive and accusatory to solidarity and inviting people to be patient, and making it possible for the most vulnerable people to be part of the public health response. Give people money so they can stay home. And I hope, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts about this. One thing that you said about the future of work, I hope it's permanent. Because I feel like I do. I feel like, think about how much time, the bedroom communities of Nairobi, Ruaka, Thika,
Yes.
Mombasa Road, all of those bedroom communities. Can you imagine how much time people waste sitting in traffic?
Traffic.
Go and sit in the office and be seen to be present.
Yes.
By the time you get to the office, you've left your house at 5 a.m.
Yes.
By the time you get to the office, you've wasted 3 hours. You need an hour to put yourself together. So the first hour is just kind of like getting situated and things like that.
Yes.
Then it's lunchtime. Like, meanwhile, a person could actually be at home, wake up at 7, be at their desk by 8,
Yes.
work until 5,
Yes.
be with their family from 5
Yes.
until 8.
Yes.
You know, I hope that offices around the world are actually saying, do we need this traffic? Can people come into the office once or twice a week
Yeah.
for team meetings,
Yeah.
to see each other,
Yeah.
and then the rest of the time you're an adult, do your work.
Yes.
So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this, John. You've hit a rich vein.
Well, as always, time flies when we're having fun. So I know this is not our last conversation, because all the issues that we've discussed are moving and changing. And so thank you very much for your time, Nanjala. We will be coming back to you. As I said, one of the things that COVID has done is that it's caused people like you to be around because you can't travel. And so
not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's a benefit for us here in Kenya to be able to tap into your minds and experience. Thank you very much, Nanjala, for this.
Thank you.